Hey friends, welcome to day one of the Advent Stitch Along. Today we are going to be working on our wise men's heads, all three of them at one time. We're going to be using colors 3864, 3862, and 3828. We're also going to be using our size 5 embroidery needle. This is the needle with the smaller eye. If you need some help, look in your PDF guide and there's a picture in there to kind of show you a close-up of that so that you can really tell the two apart. Another quick thing to note, you may look at my pattern and say, hey, that looks a little different than it did yesterday. Yes, I went ahead and printed my design onto my fabric so that you can more clearly see exactly where I'm stitching, just to make things a little bit easier for y'all. Okay, let's get stitching. We're going to be starting with our wise men's head. So that uses color 3864 and it's going to be 3 strands. So what we need to do is pull 1 arm length of this floss. If you've never done that before, look for the number on your floss skein, find the little piece hanging out and just pull on that. And you're going to hold this about at your chest and pull your arm all the way until your arm can't reach any further. And that's 1 arm length. Then going to cut it. And now we need to split it because we only need 3 strands. So just kind of flatten one edge until you can see all 6 strands and then pull the 3 and 3 apart. You want to make sure you do this kind of slowly because if you do it too fast, it's going to get all tangled. Okay, now make sure you put this 3 strand that we're not using aside so that you can use it later. With the 3 strand that we are using, we're going to tie a knot on the bottom. Try and get as close to the edge as possible. If you don't get very close, cut off the excess. And now let's thread our needle. And again, we're using size 5 needle, and we're going to be using that most of the time. We will switch to the size 22 when we get to the grass, but I will remind you at that time. Okay, thread our needle, and you want to leave about this much over on the other side. Not too much where it's going to make things harder for you when you're stitching, but not too little that you're going to end up pulling your needle out of the thread. All right. I'm going to pull my project over here in my hoop stand. I will link this below. People always have questions. It's a great product, so I can use both my hands while stitching. Okay, got to add my weight to the bottom so my stitching doesn't go everywhere. All right. So the wise men's head use a satin stitch. The satin stitch is typically comes from one direction and goes straight down, just over and over. So top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, until it fills in a whole space. I am going to show you something slightly different if you have ever stitched along with me before. And we're actually going to make one little random stitch in the middle of our wise man's head so that our knot from the bottom of our floss does not later get in the way with our crown and the beard and stuff. Trust me, I learned the hard way. So we're going to just randomly, does not matter where, just somewhere in the middle of his head, put one tiny little stitch. So you're coming all the way up, go just a little bit ahead, ahead, and come back down. So you just have a tiny random little stitch in the middle of his head. Now we're going to do our satin stitch. So let me have you, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We're going to start at the top of the head, right below the crown. We're going to come all the way up. Pull our floss, and then come straight down. Meet right where the beard and the head are meeting. Now, if your floss, like mine just now, got a little twisted, you can kind of pull it out just a little bit using your needle and just kind of rock it back and forth to make sure it gets nice and flat. Okay, and we're going to come back right next to that first stitch at the top. Pull it all the way through and go back down again. Again, right next to that previous stitch. Try and get my camera to focus so that you can see it right there. just going to keep coming from the top down to the bottom until we fill in this space. And we're going to follow that line of the beard. So each stitch is going to progressively get just a little bit smaller each time. And as you can see, we're about to cover up that random stitch. Now the reason I always have satin stitch come from the top and down to the bottom is because I always want the fabric being pulled in the same direction. If I go from the top to the bottom and then bottom to the top, your fabric is kind of getting pulled in all different directions, and we don't want that because then it's going to make your stitches look uneven. And for a satin stitch, you're wanting a little bit of perfection. Now, if you feel like your stitches are starting to get a little crooked and maybe aren't very straight anymore, and you feel like you need to kind of bring them in, what you can do is when you come to the top, instead of going straight down like you've been doing, you can either put your needle back in the hole down here from the previous stitch. Sorry, that was in the way. Back in the hole of the previous stitch, or you can kind of tuck, you can get your needle and kind of tuck just a little bit behind all these other, so that you're almost putting your needle back kind of towards the middle of the head. This will kind of help tuck your strands a little bit. And I will do that actually for my very last stitch because it gets so tiny that it's a little hard to make it a full straight stitch. So his head is just about covered. You might not see that I have one more spot, but I have about one more little spot here. I'm going to pull this through, and instead of going straight down, I'm going to tuck it. So I'm just going to put my needle kind of behind that previous stitch a little bit. Woo! Without pulling my floss. Oh, I always do this. I blame the calluses on my fingers. I think they pull my floss. Okay, now I'm going to tuck it. There you go. So you got a little face. I know it looks a little funny right now. When I first stitched this, I was like, I don't think this is gonna work out. It's not gonna look good. Trust the process. When we get to everything else, it's gonna look so much better. Now, before we remove our thread from our needle and we tie off, we're actually going to stitch his little hand. It's the exact same stitches. It's a satin stitch. So we're gonna start at the top of his hand. And I'm not tying off on the back or anything for those of you who might know where I'm going with this. I am just starting on the hand. Sorry if that was a little confusing for anyone who's stitching for the first time. Just keep following. Okay, so I've got one stitch there. And the hand, because it is so much smaller, you might have to tuck a little bit more like we did up here. Okay, so we have his little hand. Now I'm going to pull my needle off. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see a little bit better. I'm going to put my needle in a trusty little needle minder so I don't lose it. I'm going to turn my hoop over, and I'm going to tie a knot. For those of you who are stitching for the first time, we always tie a knot after we are done stitching in a section and before you start your new thread. Okay, so I've split it into, ooh, okay. I'm gonna cut it a little bit, a little too much. Split in two, I'm gonna tie 2 knots. So 1, 2. And I'm going to cut this excess, not too close to the knot because you don't want to end up weakening your knot. And then I'm going to thread my needle and I'm just going to go right onto the next head. Okay, so again, I have my needle and thread ready. I'm going to make a little random stitch in the middle. Again, that's to get the knot in the back out of the way later when we move on to the beard and the crown. I'm going to start at the top and go straight down. And we're just going to keep doing that over and over until we fill in the whole spot. Okay, so the rest of this video is going to be sped up until we move on to the next part of the wise man. Now that our heads and our little hands are done, we are now going to move on to the beards. We're going to use color 3862 and we're going to be using 3 strands. So I've already done that off camera. Just use the same steps I showed you earlier as far as splitting. We always pull an arm length and then you can get stitching. Our beard uses a back split stitch. So I'll show you that in just a second, but just to give you a little heads up, what we're going to be doing is outlining our beard all the way around and then coming back in and almost doing a second outline until we can fill the whole beard in. So let me show you the back split stitch. So starting up here, right at the top of the beard, right below the crown, we're going to make 1 stitch length forward. Now, because we're working in with such a small little space, our stitch length isn't going to be too big. So we're going to just go about here, see where my needle is, and go straight down. Now we need to make the split in the stitch. So I'm going to come forward a little bit. Again, I'm following this outline of the beard. Pull my needle all the way through. And then I'm going to split right in the middle of that previous stitch. And we're just going to keep doing that until we outline the whole beard. These videos are going to have a lot more baby grunts in them. Now this is 3 strands, so it's not going to be perfectly split right in the middle because it's obviously going to split it with 1 strand on one side and 2 on the other, but that is okay. Now when you come up here and you're getting closer to that satin stitch of the head, just be careful to not really split into that. I'm just coming just below that satin stitch of the head. I'm not splitting that floss or anything. Okay, so we have the outline right there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right back next to that first stitch I made, and I'm just going to outline again. It's obviously going to get a lot tighter, so it's going to feel like you're not quite outlining. Whenever you get to certain spots, you're going to feel like it's already filled in, if that makes sense. It'll make sense as you do it. Sometimes just listening to what's going to happen doesn't always help as much as in the middle of doing it. And it might get a little bit harder for you to see the previous stitch you made in order to split that stitch. So it's okay if you end up kind of splitting another stitch rather than the one right before that you just made. As long as you're splitting into something. Perfection is not key here. We're just filling in the beard, and the split just helps add a little bit more texture to the beard. So it's nothing that we have to be perfect about. Okay, so just as I'm getting up here towards the top, I'm going to look around and see if there's any other spot that maybe didn't get filled. Oh, baby might need some attention. Okay, so this is the last stitch right here. And I'm gonna go help her. Okay, so baby's taken care of. Once you have finished your back split stitch of the beard, you can go and look and see if there's any other little spot that kind of needs to be filled in a little bit more. And then once you're done, you can tie off on the back and then start on the next beard. Again, making a little stitch right randomly in the middle, and then a back split outline, fill in the outline again, and then tie that off and move on to the next one. I'm going to show you that now, but it's all going to be sped up. Okay, so now that we have the beard finished, we are going to do the last part for today, and that is the crown. We are going to be using color 38 to 28, and this time we're actually going to be using 2 strands. So once you get that on your needle, if I can pick my needle up, we're going to start whichever one you want. Say left one here, and we're going to be doing a straight stitch, multiple straight stitches. So I'm going to start right here on the left at the bottom. You're going to try and get, this is why we wanted the knot out of the way, so that we wouldn't have a hard time getting our needle back through. And you're trying to get just right there, as close as you can, so there's no gap. Okay, you see where I have it? I'm going to pull it all the way through and then go down straight across. Mine did something funky. I'm gonna pull it out. I'm gonna use the back of my needle so I don't pull thread unintentionally. I don't think I went far enough over. Let's try that again. I think I went a little too high on my stitch right here. And so I'm just gonna kind of go right onto the other side of it, just a little bit. There we go, much better. So we've made a straight stitch across. Now we're gonna go to the tip of the crown right here, and then go down into this previous hole. And make sure you pull your floss nice and tight. Don't pull too tight, but nice and tight so that the crown isn't, the floss isn't slack. Now I'm gonna go down here. And then back up. And we're just going to keep doing this until we filled in each little spot. You're always sharing that previous hole. Okay, so now we've got to get as close to that original spot as possible. Bring your needle up and then back down. And that's your crown. So you can tie it off and then move on to the next one. Okay, so that is the end of day one. Tomorrow we are going to come back and we're going to work on this front jacket of each of the wise men and then the French knots that are in each one of their coats. So come back tomorrow.